For decades, the career path was sort of presented to us like climbing a very specific mountain.
Like a ladder.
A ladder, yeah. And the reward for getting to the top was status, salary, security, but the price. The price was sacrificing almost all your personal time and energy on the way up. It was this great implicit promise.
And that implicit promise, that idea that your total devotion will guarantee security and, a proportional reward, it's fundamentally broken down.
Absolutely. When you look at the landscape now, you see these huge fault lines. I mean, first, there's chronic workplace burnout, which the WHO officially recognized back in 2019 as a serious occupational issue.
And that was before the pandemic.
Exactly. Then you layer on the sheer volatility we've seen, the tech layoffs, the pandemic disruptions, and this kind of constant low-level anxiety that AI could just reorganize entire industries overnight.
The old contract is obsolete. And that new context, it demands a new strategy from employees. And that strategy is what brings us to the core concept we're exploring today: career minimalism.
And it's so important to state this up front. This is not just giving up. It's not quiet quitting or just withdrawing from work.
No, not at all.
This is a deliberate, strategic way to reallocate your professional energy. It's about building a career that is resilient and sustainable. It's about sufficiency over maximization.
And our mission in this deep dive is really to equip you. Whether you're an employee trying to set sustainable boundaries or a leader trying to hold on to your best talent, with the exact framework to understand this shift, this fundamental recalibration of the psychological contract.
We're going to cover the surprising evidence, the core principles, why younger workers seem to be driving this, and the counterintuitive ways organizations can actually adapt and benefit from this search for resilience. So let's start to deep dive. Okay, we need to start with some real clarity here. What is the fundamental difference between this new strategic approach and, say, an employee who is just, disengaged and phoning it in?
The difference really comes down to two things: agency and strategy. Quiet quitting is often a reaction. It's driven by dissatisfaction, resentment, maybe a feeling of being exploited.
It's reactive.
It's reactive. Career minimalism is proactive. It's an intentional choice. It's about setting boundaries to maintain what we'd call sustainable engagement. These people are fully committed to doing their job well.
But just their job.
But they proactively draw a hard line against that pressure for total devotion.
So the key difference is control. The minimalist chooses the boundary while the quiet quitter feels kind of forced into it.
Precisely. It's a chosen philosophical framework for designing your work life. And our sources outline 5 core principles that really define this philosophy. The first one is a big shift. They prioritize security over elevation.
Okay, what does that mean in practice?
It means they value stable employment, predictable benefits, and just reduced anxiety over the aggressive, often really stressful pursuit of the next promotion or status title.
So stability literally becomes the new status symbol, and maybe reduced stress is the new raise.
That leads directly to the second principle, which is boundary establishment. And this is more than just, logging off early once in a while.
Right.
It's creating and maintaining these almost ironclad known separations between your work and your personal life. It's about actively resisting that pervasive, always-on culture.
I find the third principle, portfolio development, really interesting because it feels like it shifts the center of gravity away from the main employer and back onto the individual.
Absolutely. This is about cultivating diverse, portable skills, maybe developing side projects, or even creating multiple, smaller income streams. It's a personal risk management strategy.
Hedging your bets.
Exactly. Hedging your bets in a volatile economy. If one job disappears, your security isn't totally wiped out because your identity and your resources aren't solely tied to that one company.
And all of this requires a really disciplined approach to your own effort, right?
Okay.
Otherwise, you just fall into the trap of overworking across multiple different things.
That brings us right to strategic energy allocation. That's the fourth principle. Minimalists are ruthless about focusing their effort on what's truly essential, on high-impact contributions, and they deliberately avoid what they see as performative busyness.
Chasing visibility metrics that just consume time without adding real value.
Yes. And finally, the fifth principle is values alignment. It's making sure that their work arrangements, from the schedule to the actual duties, actively support their personal priorities, whether that's family or health or creative pursuits. They're making informed trade-offs.
Okay, so let's unpack this a little. If this is a strategic adaptation, we have to ask, why is this happening right now? What are the structural factors that have made this boundary-setting approach seem like the only rational choice for so many people?
Well, it really boils down to a fundamental erosion of trust. We see it in four main drivers. You can start with economic volatility and precarity.
Mm.
When you look at these repeated cycles, the 2008 financial crisis, the pandemic chaos, the recent waves of huge, seemingly arbitrary tech layoffs, the message employees get is crystal clear. Organizational loyalty is a one-way street.
So if the employer reduces their commitment to your job security, to your stability, then the employee rationally responds by what? Pulling back their own commitment to extra effort.
It's a reciprocal reduction. It's pure self-protection. The second major driver is, of course, burnout and mental health. This strategy is highly protective because it directly combats the root causes of exhaustion.
How so?
The seminal work on this identifies the organizational factors that drive burnout. Career minimalism is a way to limit your exposure to those factors by establishing firm boundaries around your workload and, crucially, increasing your sense of control over how and when the work gets done.
And the technology that promised us all this freedom and efficiency, it actually just ended up in intensifying the workload, didn't it? Which brings us to the third driver.
Technological intensification. I mean, the smartphone in your pocket created this implicit expectation of constant, immediate response, whether it's 9 in the morning or 9 at night. There's a term for this feeling. Telepressure.
Telepressure.
It's that constant compulsion to check and respond to work messages right now. And the research shows it is one of the strongest predictors of emotional exhaustion. Minimalists recognize that this constant availability almost never resulted in proportional pay or career advancement, so they actively push back.
And finally, you have this huge shift in priorities that we're seeing in the younger workforce. Generational values.
The data here is incredibly clear. The 2023 Deloitte survey tracked this beautifully. It found that work-life balance and flexibility ranked at the top priority for both Gen Z and millennials.
Above salary.
Above both salary and traditional career advancement opportunities. They haven't rejected ambition, they've just recalibrated what success actually looks like. They're tying it to a more comprehensive life satisfaction, not just a job title.
Which feels connected to this sense of disappointment a lot of them feel,
Yeah.
this paradox of qualifications.
That's the credential devaluation. So many of these younger professionals invested heavily in advanced degrees and certifications, only to find that the market no longer guarantees the stable, fast-track career that, maybe previous generations expected.
Right.
So when years of hard, costly effort doesn't produce that traditional return, scaling back the effort, the minimalist approach, becomes the most rational adaptation you can make. Now, this shift, it isn't universally a good or a bad thing. Its consequences are complex, and the ultimate impact really depends entirely on how the organization chooses to respond.
Okay, let's start with the upsides. For the individual who's actually practicing career minimalism.
The psychological benefits are tangible. They achieve a reduced burnout risk by limiting that emotional exhaustion and cynicism through very clear boundaries. They also report significantly enhanced life satisfaction.
Because they have a life.
Right. We know from research that overall happiness isn't maximized by putting all your effort into one single domain, even if it's a high-status one. It relies on a balanced investment across all parts of your life: health, relationships, hobbies, and work. Minimalism makes that balance possible.
And I have to imagine that the simple act of choosing your level of involvement, that agency, must be empowering in itself.
Exactly. It's an exercise of agency, and self-determination theory tells us that autonomy is a primary source of intrinsic motivation and well-being. When you feel you control your involvement, your engagement is usually of a much higher quality.
But there have to be trade-offs.
Yeah.
That reduction in effort, it must carry a clear financial penalty.
Absolutely. The most obvious is reduced income and advancement. Voluntarily limiting your hours or declining promotions has a direct financial cost. And in cultures where professional achievement is so tied to status, minimalists can face identity implications.
What do you mean by that?
Well, if you stop defining yourself by your title or your achievements, you risk what some researchers call identity diffusion. It's a risk of feeling adrift if you haven't successfully cultivated other strong sources of purpose outside of your 9-to-5.
And you could also be damaging your future professional capital.
You do. You risk network constraints. Traditional advancement often requires high visibility, a lot of networking, which boundary setting inherently limits. If you limit your exposure to those challenging, high-stakes projects, you also risk skills obsolescence over time. You might be less competitive years down the line.
Okay, let's flip this around to the organization. When an employee prioritizes sustainability, how does that affect the bottom line? Is this just a nice way of saying less productive employees?
See, that's the core tension. But organizations that learn to accommodate boundaries often see reduced turnover among these employees. Minimalists can become highly job embedded if their employer respects their priorities. You retain valuable, skilled talent.
And you get sustainable performance.
Sustainable performance. Consistent, reliable work without the intense, costly boom-bust cycle of a team that burns out and turns over every couple of months.
Stable, high-quality output is almost always better than intermittent heroics driven by crises.
It is. But the negative potential is critical too. We see a clear reduction in what's called discretionary effort.
Okay, let's clearly define that for our listener. What is discretionary effort?
Discretionary effort is often called organizational citizenship behavior, or OCBs. These are the helpful, voluntary extra steps that make a team run smoothly.
Like mentoring a junior colleague off the clock.
Or volunteering for a difficult, unglamorous task, or providing strategic feedback that falls way outside your job description. Minimalists, by definition, strategically allocate their energy away from those extra role activities.
Which has to impact the culture and team effectiveness. And what about when your high-performing people intentionally opt out of leadership tracks?
Then you face significant leadership pipeline challenges. If your most capable talent declines those advancement opportunities, succession planning becomes much, much harder. And you also risk a kind of cultural fragmentation if there's tension and resentment between the minimalists and the traditional strivers.
This is where it gets really interesting for me. If organizations want to retain talent, they can't just fight this. They have to adapt. So what are the evidence-based strategies that allow organizations to accommodate this new workforce philosophy?
The adaptive approach really centers on procedural justice and systemic change. The first area is transparent communication and expectation setting. You have to replace those vague, often contradictory implicit rules with an explicit psychological contract.
Can you give us a concrete example of that kind of transparency in action?
Sure. Think about Microsoft's approach to hybrid work. They didn't just say, go hybrid. They published explicit guidance on core collaboration hours and actively encouraged asynchronous work outside of those times.
So everyone knows the rules.
And critically, they allowed employees to set and share visible boundaries on their calendars and in their communication tools. This enables minimalism by making expectations clear and negotiable.
That clarity allows the minimalist to operate effectively without this constant fear of being penalized.
And that
Flows directly into the second point, evaluation. How do you evaluate someone fairly when FaceTime or after-hours email isn't the metric anymore?
That is procedural justice and equitable evaluation. The key action here is to shift evaluation from subjective impressions, who looked the busiest, who responded fastest to objective outcomes and measurable contributions.
This has to help address some of those inherent managerial biases, like the maternal wall bias, where managers unconsciously question the commitment of employees who prioritize family boundaries.
Exactly. If you evaluate purely on objective output, those biases have less room to operate. Deloitte provided a powerful example when they eliminated traditional numerical ratings back in 2015. They shifted assessments to focus on performance quality and future potential, reducing the weight given to those objective commitment indicators. Right. And providing other ways to grow.
You have to provide multiple career paths, specialist tracks, for instance, that offer growth without requiring that traditional hierarchical climb.
Next, we have to talk about the workload itself.
We call that workload design and flexibility. Roles have to be designed assuming realistic inputs, like a standard 40-hour week, and then you provide autonomy over how it gets done. The calm company model is a great case study here.
Like Basecamp's strategy.
Yes. Basecamp enforces strict 40-hour weeks. They even move to a 32-hour work week in the summer. And the brilliant rationale is that they treat the time constraint as a creative challenge that forces prioritization.
Interesting.
If you only have 32 hours, you are forced to define what is truly essential and cut out all the low-value performative busyness. It proves that accommodating boundaries can actually increase efficiency.
And how do we actively protect the boundaries once they are set?
That's communication norms and recovery time. Organizations must actively protect psychological detachment and combat telepressure at an institutional level. Leader modeling here is absolutely vital, meaning the leaders have to do it too.
They have to live it. A classic early example of this was Volkswagen's 2011 policy, where they configured their servers to stop delivering emails to certain employees' phones 30 minutes after their shift ended.
So if the email lands, they don't even see it until the morning. It prevents that psychological intrusion of work into recovery time?
That's the goal. It enforces the detachment required for true resource replenishment, which is what directly combats burnout.
Finally, if minimalists are strategically building these personal skill portfolios, organizations should see that as an asset, not a threat.
Supporting skills development and portfolio support is a key retention tool. Organizations should provide time and resources for employees to develop portable skills, viewing it as an investment in their own workforce. Adobe did this brilliantly by eliminating manager-mandated training and giving employees an autonomous learning fund they could spend on almost any development activity they chose.
So they have control.
That autonomy not only increased engagement, but it allowed minimalists to build those personalized resilience portfolios they value. It boosted both their skills and their loyalty.
This really requires a total systemic change to the structure of work itself. So what are the long-term organizational investments required for both career minimalists and, traditional strivers to coexist successfully?
It requires a permanent structural change. First, a psychological contract recalibration. This means moving toward explicit reciprocity and creating what we call individualized contracts or ideals that are managed transparently.
What does an ideal look like in practice for our listener?
It's basically a custom work arrangement. It's negotiated between an employee and their manager. Maybe it's flexible hours, specific project assignments, or extended remote work, but it's managed openly within the team.
So it's not a secret deal.
No. And it acknowledges that an employee's needs evolve. A young striver needs growth, a new parent needs flexibility. The system has to be flexible enough to renegotiate these terms when life situations shift.
So no more assuming total commitment up front. It has to be negotiated.
Correct. Second, we need distributed leadership models. Traditional structures concentrate leadership in the one person willing to sacrifice unlimited time.
Right, the hero.
Distributed models spread key leadership functions like mentorship, project oversight, strategic input across multiple people. This allows a minimalist to contribute significant leadership value within a defined, protected scope, which fosters a much more sustainable talent pool for everyone.
And finally, connecting work to a deeper mission without demanding that the job become their primary source of identity.
That's the third systemic capability, meaning and purpose connection. Organizations need what you could call impact transparency, showing clearly how the bounded work still contributes significant value. The goal is to help employees feel their contributions are essential and meaningful, even if they aren't devoting every waking hour to the mission.
We've covered a lot today. Career minimalism is clearly not a fad. It's a rational, strategic response to volatility, to burnout, and to broken promises. The takeaway seems to be that organizations must adapt by prioritizing flexibility, transparency, and maybe most importantly, outcome-focused evaluation.
Ultimately, the question for every organization is about resilience. If organizational health increasingly depends on preventing widespread burnout and retaining highly skilled professionals, then the capacity to accommodate career minimalism respecting defined boundaries while still achieving performance goals is probably the true measure of a company's long-term competitive health. So the question becomes, what systems do you need to audit and change right now to make that future possible?